I'm sorry for the hurt that I've caused so many people.
She was a grandmother who baked pies and attended church every Sunday. But behind that sweet smile lay a deadly secret. Velma Barfield, the death row granny, was about to become the first woman executed in the United States since 1962. What drove this seemingly harmless woman to commit such heinous crimes? Velma Barfield, born Margie Velma Bullard in the small town of Eastover, North Carolina, raised in a poor, rural family, her early life was marked by hardship and instability. Her father, Murphy Bullard, was known for his violent temper and abusive behavior, creating an atmosphere of fear and tension in the household. Despite these challenges, Velma found solace in school and developed a strong work ethic. She was known for her diligence and academic achievements, traits that would later serve her in various capacities. However, the trauma from her home life left deep emotional scars, influencing her decisions in the years to come. At the age of 16, seeking an escape from her tumultuous home environment, Velma married Thomas Burke in 1949. The couple had 2 children together, and for a time their life seemed stable. But beneath the surface, Velma struggled with personal issues, including chronic pain following a hysterectomy and the onset of back problems. As time passed, Velma's behavior began to change. She became increasingly withdrawn and developed an addiction to prescription medications, including painkillers and tranquilizers. This dependency strained her marriage, and tensions escalated between her and Thomas. In April 1969, after an argument, Velma and their children left the house. Upon returning, they found their home had burned down, and Thomas was dead. The fire was ruled accidental, but questions lingered about the circumstances surrounding his death. Following Thomas's death, Velma's life took a darker turn. She remarried in 1970 to Jennings Barfield, a widower. Their marriage was short-lived, ending with Jennings' death from what was believed to be heart complications in 1971. In the years that followed, Velma's behavior became more erratic. She began working as a caregiver for the elderly, a role that would place her in close proximity to vulnerable individuals. It was during this time that a pattern of mysterious deaths began to emerge. The stage was set for a chilling revelation. As we delve into this video, don't forget to like this video, share with friends, and subscribe to Murder Files for more delve into true crime cases. In the early 1970s, Velma Barfield began working as a caregiver, providing support for elderly men and women in their homes. It was a seemingly altruistic role, one that required trust and compassion. But unbeknownst to those who relied on her care, Velma was far from the nurturing figure they believed her to be. Instead, she was already plotting her next move, each death bringing her closer to a deadly pattern. Her first known victim was her own mother, who in 1974 fell ill after eating dinner prepared by Velma. The symptoms were consistent with food poisoning, nausea, vomiting, and abdominal pain. Doctors could not pinpoint the cause, and her mother's death was attributed to natural causes. Velma, always the gracious daughter, played the part of the grieving caretaker. No one suspected a thing. But this was only the beginning. In the same year, another elderly man under Velma's care, John Henry Lee, began showing similar symptoms after eating food prepared by Velma. His condition deteriorated rapidly, and within a few days, he was dead. His cause of death was also attributed to natural causes, and once again, no foul play was suspected. At this point, Velma's method was becoming clearer. poison. It was easy for Velma to hide her tracks. She carefully controlled what her patients ate, often preparing meals herself and ensuring no one else saw what was being added to them. Her poison of choice, rat poison and arsenic, was easy to acquire and undetectable at first, leaving no signs of foul play. She used these substances with chilling precision, each dose calculated and designed to be slow and gradual so no one would suspect murder. But something was different this time. With each death, Velma grew bolder. In 1974, after the death of another patient, the police began to take notice. There were just too many elderly deaths surrounding Velma for it to be pure coincidence. Authorities began to question her, but Velma's demeanor remained calm. She was the picture of composure, always playing the role of the innocent caretaker. Still, there was one element that couldn't be ignored. The circumstances surrounding the deaths were beginning to seem eerily similar. Patients who had no prior history of illness were dying after eating meals prepared by Velma, and every time the cause was a slow and mysterious decline in health. Despite suspicions, Velma's charm and friendly demeanor continued to disarm those around her. She seemed like the perfect person to entrust a loved one to, but behind her smile, she was growing more confident in her ability to get away with murder. The questions now were, how many deaths had there been? And was Velma's role as a caregiver merely a convenient cover, or was there a far darker truth lurking beneath her calm exterior? By 1977, the pattern was undeniable. The town of Spring Lake, where Velma had settled, was beginning to notice the string of deaths. In 1977, Velma started a relationship with another elderly man named Thomas Burke, not to be confused with her first husband. He was a kind, retired man who trusted Velma to care for him during his declining health. Thomas's family had heard rumors about Velma's past, but they dismissed them, believing she was just a sweet, elderly woman doing a good deed. It was during this time that the true nature of Velma's actions began to surface. Thomas began to experience symptoms similar to those of Velma's previous victims: nausea, vomiting, weakness, and abdominal pain. He was hospitalized for a short time, but seemed to improve. However, Velma's sinister hand had not yet finished its work. In a final twisted act, Velma prepared a meal for Thomas, laced with arsenic. His health deteriorated quickly, and this time the family was on alert. Thomas died within a few days, and his family, increasingly suspicious of the strange circumstances, decided to request an autopsy. When the results came back, they were startling. Arsenic was found in Thomas's system. The doctors were shocked. Arsenic poisoning was not common, and it was clear that this was no ordinary death. The authorities were called, and a full investigation was launched into the cause of death. As the investigators pieced together the evidence, they began to realize that Thomas's death was far from an isolated incident. The police had already started re-examining previous deaths Velma had been associated with, and they found more disturbing patterns. The victims, most of them elderly, had died in similar ways, after eating food prepared by Velma, often after suffering from nausea and stomach pain. Velma's calm demeanor, however, made her an unlikely suspect. She smiled in the face of the investigators, continued to act the part of the sweet caregiver, and expressed disbelief when confronted with the evidence. Her charm, though, was beginning to wear thin. The investigation continued, But the crucial pieces were falling into place. What had once seemed like unfortunate coincidences were now being connected through one key factor: Velma Barfield, the unassuming woman who had been poisoning her victims for years. The investigation into Velma Barfield had reached a boiling point, and the police were ready to confront her with the mounting evidence. As they brought her in for questioning, the atmosphere was tense. She had been a model of composure throughout the investigation, almost too calm for a woman who was now a prime suspect in multiple deaths. The officers could sense something was off, but they had no idea just how chilling her confession would be. During the interrogation, Velma sat across from the detectives, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was polite, smiling occasionally, as though she were merely answering questions about an old acquaintance. But beneath her serene exterior, the truth was beginning to surface. Velma's first response was typical of her calm demeanor. She denied any wrongdoing and insisted that she was simply a kind-hearted woman who had been unfortunate enough to be around people who had fallen ill. But as the detectives pressed her, something changed in the room. The tone shifted, and Velma began to speak. With an almost eerie nonchalance, Velma admitted to poisoning her victims, not just once, but several times over the course of her caregiving career. Her first victim had been her own mother, but it wasn't the last. She went on to confess that, over the years, she had poisoned at least 6 elderly people in her care, including Thomas Burke, whose death had sparked the investigation. But the most chilling part of Velma's confession wasn't just her admission to the murders. It was how casually she spoke about them. She explained that she had poisoned her victims to escape the burden of caregiving. She saw herself as a martyr, a woman trapped in a thankless role, and each death gave her a sense of relief. Her victims, she said, just faded away in her care, as though they were no more than burdens she had chosen to remove. When the investigators asked her why she had chosen poison, slow, deliberate, and nearly undetectable, Velma explained that it was the perfect method. It's just so quiet, and no one can figure out what happened, she remarked, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. She described how she carefully measured the poison into meals, ensuring that the deaths were slow enough to avoid suspicion, but fast enough to give her peace. As the confession unfolded, the detectives were left speechless. Here was a woman who had killed repeatedly, methodically, and without remorse. She was almost proud of her ability to fool everyone around her, from family members to medical professionals. And now she was sitting in front of them, almost gleeful in her openness about her crimes. What was even more disturbing was the fact that Velma didn't appear to care about the lives she had taken. She showed no remorse, no grief, only a calm, almost detached demeanor as she recounted the details of each murder. Her ability to turn her emotions on and off, to compartmentalize her actions so easily, only added to the chilling nature of the case. As the confession came to an end, Velma sat back, almost as though she had finished a casual conversation. She was no longer just a caregiver. She was a serial killer, a woman who had taken multiple lives for her own twisted sense of relief. And now her secrets were out, but the full extent of her crimes was still to be uncovered. Velma Barfield's confession had sent shockwaves through the small town of Spring Lake and beyond. What had once seemed like isolated incidents, the deaths of elderly people in her care, was now undeniably linked to a single individual. The calm, grandmotherly figure who had made meals and cared for the elderly was now revealed to be a cold-blooded killer, methodically poisoning her victims for years. With her confession in hand, the stage was set for one of the most talked-about trials in the history of South Carolina. Velma's trial began in early 1978, and it didn't take long for the media to seize upon it. Journalists from across the country descended on the small courthouse, eager to cover the sensational case. They were captivated by the contrast between Velma's outward appearance, sweet, elderly, and grandmotherly, and the horrific crimes she had confessed to. Headlines screamed of the death row granny, or the giggling granny, as the press dubbed her. The media was relentless, sensationalizing every aspect of the case, from her calm confession to her eerie, almost nonchalant demeanor in court. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that the prosecution had a strong case. Velma had confessed to murdering 6 people, and the evidence was irrefutable. Autopsies had confirmed arsenic poisoning in all of her victims, and several witnesses testified to her strange behavior in the days leading up to the deaths. But there was something unsettling about Velma's presence in the courtroom. Her calm, almost detached nature. As the prosecution laid out her case, Velma sat silently, offering no defense and showing little emotion. Her defense team tried to paint her as a woman who had been driven to her crimes by years of abuse and personal suffering. They argued that she was a product of her troubled past, from her abusive father to her broken marriages. The defense also tried to bring up her struggles with chronic pain and addiction to prescription medication, claiming that these factors clouded her judgment. But this attempt at sympathy was met with skepticism, as the public had already made their minds. They couldn't reconcile the image of the sweet, church-going grandmother with the cold killer she had revealed herself to be. The prosecution pushed forward, arguing that Velma's actions were not the result of mental illness or overwhelming hardship, but of a calculated, methodical desire for control and convenience. She had chosen poison because it was the perfect weapon, slow, effective, and nearly impossible to trace until it was too late. The prosecution painted her as a woman who had murdered for the sole purpose of escaping the burdens of caregiving and financial strain, showing no regard for the lives she had taken. The trial culminated in a swift conviction. Velma Barfield was found guilty of the murder of Thomas Burke, her final victim, the one whose family had demanded an autopsy and uncovered the truth. As she was sentenced to death, Velma's demeanor remained unchanged. She offered no apology, no sign of remorse, only the same placid smile that had disarmed everyone around her for so long. The media circus around the trial didn't end with the conviction. The public was fascinated by the giggling granny, the sweet old woman who had become one of America's most notorious female serial killers in American history. Journalists camped outside the courthouse, writing stories about her cold demeanor, the way she laughed during her confession, and her bizarre behavior throughout the trial. Some even speculated about her psychological state, but the majority of the public saw her as an unrepentant killer, a woman who had taken lives without a second thought. As the trial ended and the sentencing was handed down, Velma Barfield's story became a national sensation. The public could not shake the image of a sweet elderly woman who had committed such unspeakable acts. Velma would forever be remembered as one of America's most chilling serial killers, a grandmother who had poisoned her way through several lives, leaving behind nothing but her calm, eerie smile. But the most chilling part of Velma's confession wasn't just her admission to the murders, it was how casually she spoke about them. She explained that she had poisoned her victims to escape the burden of caregiving. She saw herself as a martyr, a woman trapped in a thankless role, and each death gave her a sense of relief. Her victims, she said, just faded away in her care, as though they were no more than burdens she had chosen to remove. When the investigators asked her why she had chosen poison, slow, deliberate, and nearly undetectable, Velma explained that it was the perfect method. "It's just so quiet, and no one can figure out what happened," she remarked, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. She described how she carefully measured the poison into meals, ensuring that the deaths were slow enough to avoid suspicion, but fast enough to give her peace. As the confession unfolded, the detectives were left speechless. Here was a woman who had killed repeatedly, methodically, and without remorse. She was almost proud of her ability to fool everyone around her, from family members to medical professionals, and she was now sitting in front of them almost gleeful in her openness about her crimes. What was even more disturbing was the fact that Velma didn't appear to care about the lives she had taken. She showed no remorse, no grief, only a calm, almost detached demeanor as she recounted the details of each murder. Her ability to turn her emotions on and off, to compartmentalize her actions so easily, only added to the chilling nature of the case. As the confession came to an end, Velma sat back, almost as though she had finished a casual conversation. She was no longer just a caregiver. She was a serial killer, a woman who had taken multiple lives for her own twisted sense of relief. And now her secrets were out. But the full extent of her crimes was still to be uncovered. After Velma Barfield's conviction, she was transferred to the South Carolina State Penitentiary, where she was placed on death row. It was here, in the stark isolation of her prison cell, that Velma would spend the next few years of her life, facing the inevitable punishment for her crimes. But even in the confines of death row, Velma's story took unexpected turns, twists that would leave both the public and her legal team questioning the true nature of her actions. At first, Velma seemed unfazed by her sentence. The woman who had shown no remorse in the courtroom continued to display an unsettling calm in her new surroundings. Despite the gravity of her crimes, she behaved like a model inmate, following the rules and spending her days reading romance novels, knitting, and praying. She became a regular fixture at the prison chapel, where she would pray for forgiveness, though it was unclear whether she was truly repentant or simply maintaining her carefully crafted persona. Despite her lack of visible remorse, Velma's case garnered attention from religious groups, death penalty activists, and even the media, all of whom began to question whether a woman like her deserved to be executed. The public's perception of her had shifted over time. While she had been labeled a cold, calculating killer, some began to see her as a victim of circumstance, an abused woman who had suffered mental anguish for years. They wondered whether she was truly guilty of murder or if her troubled past had driven her to the unthinkable. Velma herself seemed to recognize the change in public opinion. She became more open with her fellow inmates and prison staff, sharing details of her past and, for the first time, expressing some form of remorse. She spoke of her abusive upbringing, her failed marriages, and the chronic pain that had plagued her for years. Many of the prison chaplains and counselors who spoke to Velma noted that she had appeared to find some sort of peace in her final years. But whether this newfound peace was genuine or a carefully constructed facade was still up for debate. The question that haunted many was whether Velma Barfield truly understood the gravity of her actions. She had killed not out of self-defense, not out of passion, but out of convenience, choosing to end the lives of those who had become burdens to her. Yet she never seemed to fully grasp the extent of her cruelty. Instead, she spoke of her victims in a detached manner, almost as though they were characters in a story, rather than real people with families and lives of their own. In 1982, after years of legal battles, Velma's case took another unexpected twist. Her execution date was set, and the final stages of her time on death row began. However, just as her execution was nearing, a series of appeals raised questions about the fairness of her trial and the evidence used to convict her. Lawyers argued that her confession had been coerced and that she had not received proper psychiatric evaluations. These appeals led to a temporary stay of execution, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though Velma's life might be spared. But as the legal process dragged on, public opinion began to shift again. Her supporters, who had once rallied behind her, began to lose faith in her claim of innocence and remorse. By 1984, the legal battles were over, and the execution order was reinstated. The state of South Carolina had made its decision. Velma Barfield would be executed for the murders of her elderly victims, and there would be no further appeals. The day had finally come. After years of legal battles, delays, and public debates, Velma Barfield was set to face the consequences of her crimes. She had been on death row for nearly 6 years, her fate hanging in the balance with each passing year. But on November 2, 1984, Velma's time had run out. The quiet, grandmotherly woman who had poisoned her way through the lives of vulnerable elderly people was about to be executed. Velma's final hours were marked by a strange calmness that had defined much of her time on death row. As she prepared for her execution, she refused to be emotional or show fear. Those who were with her during the final moments described her as serene, almost eerily so. She was allowed to meet with her spiritual advisor and a few close friends. But she didn't express regret for her actions in a meaningful way. Her demeanor remained composed as she faced the inevitable. In the hours leading up to the execution, Velma made a statement to the media. She denied any guilt for the murders she had committed. While she had confessed in the past, her final words were filled with ambiguity. "I'm sorry for the hurt that I have caused," she said. But whether she was truly sorry for the lives she had taken or simply for the suffering that had come with her arrest and conviction was unclear. It was a final, cold admission of responsibility without any clear expression of remorse or deep regret. The execution itself was set to take place at the South Carolina State Penitentiary, and the media had gathered in force. The public was captivated by this rare spectacle, the first woman to be executed in the U.S. in over 20 years. Velma's case had garnered national attention, both for the horror of her crimes and for the perplexing image of a sweet elderly woman who had committed them. At 6 p.m., Velma was escorted to the death chamber. She was calm, her hands clasped in front of her, as she was seated in the electric chair. The executioner prepared the chamber, and the last rituals of her life were conducted in silence. There were no screams, no protests, just the low hum of the machinery as the minutes ticked by. At 6:15 p.m., the switch was pulled. The electrical current coursed through Velma's body. She was pronounced dead at 6:22 p.m. It was over. In the aftermath of Velma Barfield's execution, there were mixed reactions. For some, justice had finally been served for the lives she had taken. For others, her case remained a disturbing example of the complexity of the death penalty, how society viewed her as both a victim of her past and a monstrous killer. Her execution brought closure to the families of her victims, but it also left lingering questions about the true nature of her guilt and remorse. Velma Barfield died a convicted serial killer, but in her final moments, the world still questioned who she really was: the sweet grandmother who poisoned her loved ones, or the victim of an abusive past who simply became a monster in her own right. Velma Barfield's case left an unsettling legacy that still resonates today. As the first woman executed in the U.S. since 1962, she became a national sensation. Her nickname, the Giggling Granny, highlighted the contrast between her sweet grandmotherly image and her gruesome crimes. This eerie juxtaposition haunted the public, making her one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. Velma's execution was met with mixed reactions. Some viewed it as justice for the lives she had taken, while others saw her as a tragic figure, shaped by years of abuse and psychological trauma. Many questioned whether her troubled past had pushed her toward violence, making her not just a killer, but a victim of circumstance. Her story sparked continued debate over the death penalty, especially regarding women. Velma's execution raised questions about whether gender and past trauma should influence sentencing for violent crimes. In the years following her death, Velma became an icon in popular culture, featured in crime documentaries and books. Her case remains a chilling reminder of how evil can hide behind the most unassuming facades, and her name is forever etched in the history of American crime.
Velma Barfield's chilling story forces us to question how far someone will go when pushed to the edge, and what makes a monster. What do you think? Was she a product of abuse, or was she simply evil? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into true crime stories like this. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay curious and